Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
My name is Temple Grandin. I'm not like other people. I think in pictures, and I connect them.
But this is the problem. The verbal thinkers get locked into the label. You're putting Elon Musk in the same category as an adult that's nonverbal that can't dress themselves. You've got the same name on it. That doesn't make very much sense. See, as a visual thinker, I'm seeing these different people. I go, that just doesn't make sense.
That's our special guest this week, Temple Grandin, innovator, author, activist, autistic, and subject of HBO's biopic, Temple Grandin, A Humane Approach. Our host David Hirsch spoke with Temple Grandin about a whole wealth of topics, and we'll hear that conversation along with excerpts of Temple's TED Talk and some snippets from the HBO movie on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Here now is our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
So let's get right to this fascinating conversation between David Hirsch and Temple Grandin.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Dr. Temple Grandin of Fort Collins, Colorado, a national speaker, best-selling author, professor of animal science at Colorado State University, and outspoken advocate for the neurodivergent and those on the autism spectrum. You are also an Ashoka Fellow. You were also named to the Time 100 list as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in the heroes category. You also have a number of honorary degrees from universities around the world, including McGill University in Canada, Swedish University of Agricultural Science, Carnegie Mellon University, as well as Emory University. Temple, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
It's really great to be here.
Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Well, I grew up in Dedham, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. So I was an Easterner. And when I was a little kid, I was very severely autistic. And then by the time I was 4, I was verbal. I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. Another thing I want to talk about is the big spectrum. The autism goes from like Elon Musk, who's now disclosed he's autistic, to somebody who can't dress themselves. And then you have what used to be called the Asperger type, where there's no speech delay, and the kid is, just not very social. And half the programmers in Silicon Valley are probably on the spectrum. You see, this is where it's a true spectrum. In fact, I just found a new article in Science magazine right here where brain scans were looked at with a specialized computer system. And they found that it truly is a continuous trait. So when the slightly geeky and nerdy become autistic, and then you have another kid that never learns to dress themselves. But the thing is, when the kids are very small, they can look really terrible, and you don't know how they're going to come out. Because I was horrible when I was little. Now, fortunately, I went to a neurologist, and the neurologist checked me for epilepsy, and I did not have epilepsy. That's usually a good sign, but I was terrible. But fortunately, by 2.5, gotten into very good early intervention. And the emphasis was on learning words, learning how to wait and take turns, and basic skills like dressing, washing your hands, just learning basic skills. I was very lucky to get into that really good program. And then later on, my mother always encouraged my ability in art. Take the thing the kid is good at and build on it. Now, when autistic kids get older, I'm talking about the fully verbal end of the spectrum, they tend to get uneven skills. Really good at one thing, really bad at something else. And I was one of these visual kids who was super good at art. And I've also learned that my kind of mind also is good at mechanical things. I would spend hours and hours tinkering with kites and parachutes. And so you have the art mind, object visualizer, good at art, but also good at mechanics. And we've got kids growing up today that have never learned to use a ruler. I think that's terrible. Then you got the kid that's the mathematics kid. And that's the kid, often mathematics and music go together. Well, then he may need more advanced math. And then you've got the autistic kid that loves words and facts. And we need to be building a lot more on the strengths. And I discuss that in my book, The Autistic Brain.
Yeah, well, I think the point I hear you making about building on strengths is that it's a leadership skill, right? To know what your strengths are and then play to those and then try to compensate for things that, you're not good at. And that's not, say, focus on things you're not good at, but find others that might be able to compensate for, a weakness that you might have so you can continue to focus on your strengths.
Okay, good.
So I want to go back a little bit, though. And I'm sort of curious to know, what did your dad do for a living?
He was a real estate agent, and he probably was on the spectrum. He was not very helpful. My mom, I got to give her credit for all of the work. The mother's done a lot of talks on autism, and one of the problems is a lot of dads check out. And he was one of the ones that checked out, and he wanted to put me in an institution. And there's that scene in the HBO movie where it's a doctor saying it should be an institution. Well, that's the way it normally was in the 50s when you had a kid that didn't talk. No, unfortunately, it was my father that wanted to do that. And that's written up in my mother's book. And now I did have a man that's really important to me, my science teacher. He gave me interesting projects to do because I got fascinated with optical illusions. And then that got me motivated to study so I could become a scientist. I get asked, what motivated you? Well, this is where a good teacher and William Carlock, and I never called him Bill. It was Mr. Carlock. You got to remember my generation.
Oh, Temple, you have a very special mind. You know that? You see the world in ways that others can't, and it's quite an advantage. And you know something? If you weren't such a goof and you developed this talent, you could easily go on to college.
What would I do at college?
Well, with your mind, anything you wanted to. Just pick a subject.
Cows. Do they have colleges with cows?
Yes, they do, and horses and pigs and goats and sheep. And it's called animal husbandry.
Animal husbandry.
Yeah, it deals with the care of animals. Temple, think of it as a door. A door that's going to open up onto a whole new world for you. And all you need to do is decide to go through it.
I can't emphasize enough the importance of a teacher, of somebody like Mr. Carlock.
Yeah, well, thank you for mentioning that. And I know that he was played by David Strathairn in the movie.
That's correct, yeah.
And I know that it was a very, very important relationship. And if I remember, in real life, it was at the Hampshire Country School, if I remember correctly.
That's right. And he did a very nice job. I thought all the people, Catherine O'Hara as Anne, I thought all of the actresses and actors did a really good job.
So I know that you mentioned that your mom was really the leader. She was the one that was your strongest advocate.
She was the leader. She was absolutely the leader. And she was very creative. Like I'd stick my finger in the mashed potatoes and Mother would say, use the fork. She just would give the instruction.
Yeah, well, thank God for mothers in society, because if it wasn't for moms, I know where we would be.
Well, the other problem is I see some moms, this is a show for dads, but let's talk about a fully verbal teenager doing well in school. They got an autism label. And I'm seeing them get so overprotected by the moms, they aren't learning things like shopping. And this is where the dad is sometimes have come in and said, hey, we got to get out and do some things. And that's something that I've talked to a lot of families where a dad really did a lot of good, because some of the moms, especially the teenagers, overprotect. I'm appalled at the number of fully verbal autistic teenagers I've talked to that have never gone shopping by themselves. That is ridiculous.
So what you're referring to is having real world experiences, right? Not being sheltered, right?
And then the other big thing is working skills. I had a very good elementary school life, a wonderful little small school. got kicked out of a big school for fighting, and mother found a special school I could go to. She actually gave me a choice of special schools, and family could afford to pay for it. And the first thing they did is they put me to work running the horse barn. And I did no studying, but I learned how to run a horse barn. And what I remember from that is I learned how to work. And that is really important. And that's something that a lot of kids aren't learning. And then in the last year I was at the school, Mr. Carlock came on the scene and got me interested in science projects. And then all of a sudden, overnight, I went from a rotten student to a good one, because now I had a reason to study.
Yeah, well, it was really a turning point in your own educational experience. Speaking of education, my recollection was you have a BA in human psychology from Franklin Pierce University.
That's correct.
Then you went on to get a master's in animal science from Arizona State University.
That's correct, yeah.
And a dozen or so years later, you got your PhD in animal science from our alma mater, University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign.
That's right. University of Illinois. I was there from 1980 until 1989.
And what was going on early in your career when you graduated from your master's program?
I was out in the field designing cattle facilities. That was something I was out in the field doing. And one thing I learned very early on is I learned to show off my work. And I would show people pictures of my drawings, photographs of jobs. I learned to sell my work. I also saw doors to opportunity. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I get the editor's card and I start writing for the magazine. This was the State Farm magazine. Mm-hmm. Because I knew writing for that magazine really helped my career. I saw that door. And a lot of people don't see doors to opportunity. And that got me press pass into all kinds of meetings, got me press pass into national meetings. And then I walked up to the editor and got the card for the national magazine. See, I saw those doors to opportunity. And I see so many people that just don't see that. They're everywhere. They just don't see them.
So out of curiosity, as it relates to your career, what was it that prompted you to pursue a career in animal science to begin with?
Well, I was originally a psychology major, and I wanted to study optical illusions. I actually did a year towards a master's at Arizona State in psychology. That just didn't work out. One of the problems is I'm not very good at math. I'm very concerned that people like me who are really very vivid visual thinkers can't do algebra. And the people that I worked with that built a lot of my equipment also cannot do algebra. And this one guy owns a gigantic food factory where he invented half the equipment. He's got a corporate jet, can't do algebra either, and probably didn't graduate my degree. I can't tell you where the corporate jet took me. I'll just call it Willy Wonka in stainless steel. And we had a discussion of every label he would have been. This is the thing that's a concern, is I go back and forth between the industrial world and the autism world, and I'm seeing too many really capable kids getting held back, and we've got a label now that's so broad, it's ridiculous. And I think the reason this happened is when the kids are little. I looked atrocious when I was little, but I looked really atrocious. The only good thing was I was not deaf and I did not have epilepsy, and I was very lucky to get good early intervention.
So you mentioned that a couple of times, the importance of early intervention. And I'm wondering if you could be more specific. What do you recall the benefits of that early intervention being in your situation?
Learning how to talk. Also, these kids have got to learn how to wait and take turns at games, how to learn and take turns in an activity. And a lot of these kids have problems with that. And that was something that all kinds of turn-taking games were done. And then just an emphasis on learning skills. I'm seeing too many kids that haven't learned to get dressed. There's a lot of emphasis on learning those kinds of things. The teachers, they had a little school in the basement of their house, and they just knew how to work with these kids. 6 other little kids. I think there was a kid with Down syndrome in my class. Early intervention is really important, but where I'm seeing things really falling down is getting into work. But then when I'm out there in the world of industry, there's all kinds of people my age retiring now that own things like metal fabrication shops, and they're not getting replaced. And I think one of the worst things the schools did is taking out all the hands-on classes: cooking, sewing, auto mechanics, carpentry, theater, music, because these are all things that can expose kids to possible careers. And some of the people I worked with, one that definitely was autistic, Another one that definitely was not autistic. What helped those people, a single welding class, started their business. Now, I'm not saying welding's for everybody, but these are people 60s and 70s now.
Oh yeah. Well, I can remember, when I was in high school, for that matter, taking like an auto class, right? Really basic stuff.
Yeah.
You learn how to time an engine, you learn how to change a tire, change the oil. I mean, really basic things. And I think for some, like you said, it's working with your hands. It's very rewarding. There's that curiosity that goes along with, how do things work, and how do I put them back together when I take them apart?
Exactly.
And, you're training certain aspects of your brain, right, to work in a way. And it's problem solving, basically, at a very early age, right?
Well, that's right. And then there's a problem with a lot of these young adults getting addicted to video games. And if they were getting fabulous video game industry jobs, I would not be criticizing. But that's not what's happening. What I'm seeing with young autistic adults now, let's go play video games in the basement or get out and get a life. But what I'm happy to say is I've now talked to 5 or 6 different young adults where they were weaned off of video games with auto mechanics. And they found that the cars were more interesting than the video games. And not weaned off with bagging groceries at the store or something like that. It has to be something really interesting.
That's fabulous. Well, I'm sort of curious, at the risk of focusing on the negative, what were your biggest challenges as a youth versus being a young adult, and then today, for that matter?
Well, when I got into puberty, horrible anxiety attacks, absolutely horrible anxiety attacks. And I discussed that in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And my anxiety attacks worsened as I got through my 20s, worse and worse and worse and worse. And then I discovered a low dose of antidepressant medication when I was in my early 30s. And I had nonstop colitis. My health was falling apart. And when I went on the low dose of the antidepressant, colitis cleared up. Health problems got not totally cured, but almost none, not a problem anymore. But that was strictly biology, and that's why I have a chapter in Thinking in Pictures called A Believer in Biology.
So that sort of touches on one of the hot button issues, as it relates to autism and some other rare diseases, about medication, right? Because that's what I heard you say, is that you struggled a lot for a long period of time. And then in your case, the medication actually made a meaningful difference.
Well, but it wasn't given to me as a very young child.
Mm-hmm.
There are way too many drugs given out to little kids, way too many drugs. And especially drugs with really bad side effects, antipsychotic drugs that have obesity and other, really bad side effects. I was taking one low dose of the ancient old drug, desipramine, but I know other people on the spectrum where a low dose of Prozac really turned them around.
Mm-hmm.
I think the younger the kid is, the more conservative. And I have a basic principle is if you try a medication or you try a diet or something, try one thing at a time. So you know what's working. I'm seeing too much where I talk to parents and they're just throwing prescriptions and stuff, 5 or 6 different things with no thought put into it.
Yeah, well, there's probably an emphasis in society today that, we'll be able to resolve things through medication. And there's for some reason, eagerness in the medical community to suggest that, there's simple solutions.
Well, medication was very important for me. I would have done the dipping vat project shown in the movie. I was not on medication when I did that project. But then in my early 30s, my health really started deteriorating. And I don't think I would have become a college professor if I hadn't gone on the medication. It was like my fear system was ramped up, going crazy over nothing. I mean, it was all biology. And I've talked to other people on the spectrum that have horrible panic attacks, and I've talked them into trying some Prozac. Very low dose. Too high a dose, you get agitation. Has to be a very low dose. And it made a big difference. I also know somebody that was doing very well on a low dose of Prozac, went off of it, and the result was a disaster.
If I can summarize what you've said, you're a proponent of biology and the use of medications, but for adults more so than for children.
Yeah, for adults more so. Yeah, that would be right. The other thing is you have to figure out, okay, now autism, you have like a nonverbal person and you're getting, okay, now he's punching out a wall or something really bad. Let's do a little troubleshooting on what causes the behavior. The first thing is frustration because they can't communicate. You've got to give them a way to communicate. Another thing in a nonverbal person that cannot communicate, let's say he's been good and now his behavior just turned terrible and he's an adult, make sure that that person does not have a painful medical issue like acid reflux, ear infection, tooth infection, urinary tract infection, some painful hidden problem they can't tell you about. And then also sometimes the meltdowns are more likely to happen in noisy environments. It may be sensory. So you've got to figure out what's setting it off. But too often doctors get stuck in the label and they'll say, well, it's just autism, when maybe he should have been treated for acid reflux with an over-the-counter drug.
Yeah, point well made, especially when, like you said, you're dealing with somebody who's nonverbal. They can't explain what the issue or the problem is.
They can't tell you where it hurts. That's the problem.
Right.
And so you always have to make sure, especially in adult where the behavior suddenly turned bad, that's where you've got to rule out. And there's simple things to check. Hidden painful medical problem.
Good point. So you're probably approaching retirement. I'm not suggesting that you should be retiring, but we're of the same age group. And I'm wondering, you've described your challenges as a youth growing up, as a young adult. I'm wondering, what are the type of challenges that you experience today?
Well, I'm still a professor. I'm in my 70s now. I'm still a professor. I'm still traveling. And I've thought about what would I do if I got confined to a wheelchair. I've thought about that. And we have a science museum here. I think I'd try to get little kids turned on to some of the science museums. And I was thinking, I've looked at walkers. I've actually thought about how I'm going to trick them out. Just the other day, I talked to somebody that couldn't get him to use a wheelchair. So a Harley bike mechanic made him a really cool wheelchair that looked like a Harley. Then he used it. Well, I always liked bike streamers on my bike when I was a kid, on the handlebars. Well, my walker's going to have bike streamers.
Okay.
I got to make it.
Got to make it hip. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your books. You've written quite a few books, and the one that stood out for me was Thinking in Pictures.
Yes, and that's my autobiography, and that's one of my favorite books. We just did a new afterword for it where I talk about the different kinds of thinking, talk about emotions. A lot of people will find that helpful. What I've noticed on the high end of the autism spectrum, where they're successful, all these people I worked with, they all had their own businesses. You see, and that's basically what I did, is having my own business. But this is the problem. The verbal thinkers get locked into the label, and you're putting Elon Musk in the same category as an adult that's nonverbal that can't dress themselves. You've got the same name on it. That doesn't make very much sense. See, as a visual thinker, I'm seeing these different people. I go, that just doesn't make sense.
So what would you propose? I don't think there's a simple solution.
Well, there is, but I think the reason why it happened is because when the kids are 3, I looked really severe. The only hint that was good was the no epilepsy.
So one of the turning points, if I can recall what you just said earlier, was that your mom really pushed you, right, to develop a vocabulary.
And she had a really good sense of how to stretch me, because you don't just throw the kid into like a sensory overload situation. She always gives some limited choice, but she knew how to stretch me. One time I was afraid to go to the lumberyard myself to buy some stuff for remodeling the kitchen. And she made me go. And I had to go in and talk to the staff there and get the boards bought. Well, that was kind of stressful, but I did it. She had a very good sense of just how much to stretch, because I think a lot of moms overprotect. And this is where some dads, when they do good things, they get the kid doing stuff. I've talked to several places that do like adventure camps for individuals with autism, like surfing or going on boats. And what these camps teach the parents in a 3-day session is that, their kid actually could go on a boat, maybe even go on a surfboard. You show the moms that the kid actually could do something. Because this is where, when dads are helpful, they push the kid to do some new things.
Do you think that that's directly correlated, Temple, to building some self-confidence and independence?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really important. And then driving, it's going to that took a lot more practice, and taught me to drive. And she had an old pickup with 3 on the tree and a bad clutch. And it was 3 miles up to the mailbox and a dirt road and 3 miles back. And that's where I learned.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful. I can remember when I was 16 or 17 learning how to drive a manual transmission on an old pickup truck. And, that's probably like the best type of vehicle in the world to do that. It's very forgiving, right?
Well, we started out in the middle of the horse pasture lurching around where we started.
That's wonderful. So I'm back to your book, Thinking in Pictures. You're a visual learner, and you've got a gift, many gifts, but one of your gifts is that once you've seen something that you can recall it.
Well, and so the very first thing I did in cattle handling was to look at what cattle were seeing when they were walking through chutes and shadows and things like this that other people just didn't think to look at those things. But when you're a visual thinker, it was obvious to me to look at what the cattle were looking at. And when I was in my 20s, I didn't know that other people thought in words. I didn't know that. But I'm learning more about how people think in words are different. Like I just got off a Zoom call with a really nice agricultural school. And one of the professors was asking, what's all this shadow stuff? And I said, well, shadow changed at different times of day. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, the cattle went through the facility just fine. And 3:30 in the afternoon, a shadow appeared. And it was terrible. And the cattle refused to walk over the shadow. You see, now when I talk about that, I'm seeing it. But there's some people that are very verbal, they don't see it. But I think another thing, looking at the whole autism thing, is by the time I was 5, we could do normal activities like church, visit grannies, shopping, go to a movie. But then you have the family where the kid is so severe that they can't do any of those things. That's where things get a lot more difficult, a lot of divorces, and usually the mom has to work on it. So at one end, with the fully verbal, moms overprotect. But then you've got very severe problems, the mom, the work gets dumped on her.
People don't want to hear all those details about cattle.
But I do. I want to be with cattle.
Sweetheart, I don't want you to avoid people.
They make me feel bad.
Then ignore them. You are the only master of science in the room. And I am so proud of you. Temple, look at me. Look at me. Do you know people tell each other things with their eyes? This is me telling you that I love you and I respect you.
I will never learn how to do that.
I know.
So what was this device that you created when you were a young person that provided you with a certain level of comfort that you went on to sort of patent?
Well, I had all these panic attacks, and I watched cattle going through a squeeze chute at my aunt's ranch. So I made a squeeze chute-like device that I could get into the applied pressure, and I found I kind of calmed me. Deep pressure can be calming.
And what did you call that device?
Squeeze machine, and it's described in detail in my book, Thinking in Pictures.
And were you able to manufacture that, or was somebody able to manufacture that?
There's a company called the Therafin Corporation that does manufacture it. Now, the downside is it is expensive, but you also can use things like weighted blankets and weighted vests and get some of the same effect, and they're not expensive.
What I found interesting about your situation with the squeeze machine is that you preferred that over human touch, from what I recall.
With sensory issues in autism, it's easier to tolerate something if I could control it. And this is also true for sound sensitivity with autistic kids. If they don't like something like the vacuum cleaner, let them turn it on and off. Let them turn the hairdryer on and off. And then one kid found the vacuum cleaner was his favorite thing. And he could control it. You see, the squeezing machine, I could control it. You see, and that's one of the ways that you can desensitize. You see, now I like to be hugging people, where I could control it. And that element of control is really important in helping to desensitize some of these sensory problems.
Yeah, well, thanks for emphasizing that. You have a number of other books. The other one that I read was A Different, Not Less. And there are a dozen and a half individuals that are sharing their story, right?
That's right. And there's 18 of them in that book. And I learned a lot editing that book because each person tells their own story. And we're getting diagnosed later in life. And these were all fully verbal, all employed, all different kinds of jobs, where the diagnosis helped them later in life was the relationships. That's where it was helpful. Like I had a lady come up to me at the Denver airport and she goes, well, you saved our marriage. I read your book and now I understand my engineer husband. And it gave me insight being the editor of that book.
So are you in favor of individuals who are seeking employment to wear their autism on their sleeve and being very transparent about it? Or would you be recommending that they sort of not draw attention to that? Where do you fall on that?
I never disclosed. Actually, starting out in the cattle industry in the 70s, being a woman was 10 times the barrier, 10 times the barrier. Being autistic was no non-issue. And I learned how to sell my work. I would just show off my drawings, show off my pictures. That's how I got the jobs. And, you can get in there asking for so many accommodations that you annoy people. Now, there's a few things that I can't do. Multitasking. The other thing is I like really clear guidance on what I'm supposed to do. I'll do the designing, but I need to know what the boundaries of the job are, sort of the cost range for the job. If I have to do a task that involves step-by-step, instructions, I need to write them down. So I just say, I need to write it down. Let me write it down, then I can do it. Maybe that's, advocating for myself, but there's still some discrimination. I've heard some very bad discrimination where somebody lost a good job when they disclosed.
Yeah, well, my sense is that it's circumstantial, right? At some point, it's just who you are, right? I'm an autistic person, right? Not a person with autism.
Yeah, well, and when you get into the whole thing about person with autism or autistic, my very first book, Emergence labeled Autistic, autistic was in the title before I even thought about what they call person first language.
And, what I'm learning is that it seems like with all disabilities, right, you want to be person first. But with autism, there's a sort of a pendulum is swinging back the other way.
That's right.
And individuals, especially adults like yourself with autism, don't want to be, person first. This is just who I am, right? I'm proud of who I am.
Well, autism in its mildest forms is just a personality variant. See, this is the problem. You can say, well, half the population is more emotional and social, and the other half the population is more into what they do and less social emotional. And then it just goes in severity. And this new study that shows that, looking at brain scan data, it's on a true continuum. And when do you slap a label on it? You're going to call every computer scientist in Silicon Valley handicapped? You see, this is the problem. It isn't like you're blind and you can say, now you've got this much sight loss, and you're totally blind, or you're deaf, or you can't walk. The problem you get with autism in its mildest forms, I think it's just part of variation in its mildest forms.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm thinking about your TEDx talk, or your TED talk, I should say, entitled "The World Needs All Kinds of Minds," which you did back in February of 2010.
That's right.
And it's been viewed over 6 million times.
Yeah.
I think I'll start out and just talk a little bit about what exactly autism is. Autism is a very big continuum that goes from very severe, the child remains nonverbal, all the way up to brilliant scientists and engineers. And I actually feel at home here because there's a lot of autism genetics here. You wouldn't have any... It's a continuum of traits. When does a nerd turn into, Asperger, which is just mild autism?
Where did you give your talk, and how did you go about deciding the topic?
Well, I've always been interested in the different kinds of minds. And another thing I'm concerned about is my kind of mind. I think our educational system is screening out my kind of mind with draconian math requirements, which I would not be able to pass today. But the thing is, we need our visual thinkers, to fix things, to build stuff. I mean, I worked with, a lot of the people I worked with, I've talked to them, they can't do algebra either. Gigantic shortage of electricians, shortage of people to fix cars. It's a different kind of intelligence.
So were there any surprises, any reactions that you got to your TED Talk?
Well, a lot of people, I remember them laughing when I said that, a lot of the people in Silicon Valley were probably somewhat on the spectrum. No, I've been there. I've been to those places.
Well, you keep making reference to Silicon Valley, and you've made reference to Elon Musk more than once. Have you ever met Elon Musk?
No, I haven't, but I've only, I read Ashley Vance's book quite a few years ago when it first came out. Ashley Vance's book, Elon Musk. And I marked up that book when it came out where I thought he was autistic, but I couldn't say it. But then after he came out on Saturday Night Live, then I can say it. And I've got a copy of Elon Musk's book. Yeah, here it is right here, complete with ancient Post-it notes, where I marked it where I thought he was autistic.
Yeah, well, that's something that your mom and his mom have in common, is raising somebody, with a brilliant mind, right? But the early experience was very difficult, right? Because, you didn't process things the same way.
Well, he got horrible bullying in school.
And didn't you experience some of that yourself?
Oh, yes. Teenage years, horrible. Worst part of my life was teenage years. Managed to get to elementary school without getting bullied because the teacher explained to the other students I had a disability that wasn't visible. But high school was horrible, absolutely horrible. And the only place I had friends was friends who shared interests, like in horseback riding or electronics.
Yeah, what's a wise word to parents, right? When their children are that age, right? They need to be thinking a little bit outside the box on what they can be doing to help their young teenagers to navigate these tricky parts of life.
No, they were the worst years of my life, absolutely the worst years. And bullying, it was absolutely horrible. The other thing is I have problems with all the disabilities just being lumped together, because you have disabilities like a very, very severe autistic teenager, very, very severe autistic adult, the parents may have, can't do anything. And then you've got somebody who's just kind of nerdy on the spectrum. See, that's the thing. You have this huge spectrum. So I've talked to parents where they're so stressed out, they can't even have a night out. Dad and the mom can't go out to dinner, just have a nice night out once in a while. They're completely stressed. You see, this is the problem you get with autism, is you got that at one end of the spectrum, and other end of the spectrum, you don't have that. And then you have everything in between. You see, I have problems with the generalization because, see, I see them as kind of specific cases. Verbal thinker just tends to merge all the words together. And I had a blind roommate when I was in college. We got along. She was one of the best roommates I ever had. In fact, I used to go to the movie with my blind roommate, and we'd sit in the back, and I'd whisper what was on the screen in her ear.
Yeah, well, you're taking a page out of a friend's playbook. I don't know if you know the individual. His name is Jim Stovall. He's out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And Jim lost his vision entirely by the time he was 29. He's in his 60s now. So he's been blind, completely blind for more than half of his life. But because he saw at the beginning of his life, normally, and then his sight deteriorated the last 10 years of his life, he went on to create something called the Narrative Television Network, which is allowing people who are blind or who are sight impaired, there's about 13 million Americans that fit that description, to be able to enjoy movies and TV and videos. And they have this little narration that comes in between the dialogue, just like you were doing with your roommate.
That's what I was doing with her. We would sit in the back, so we'd try to get away from the other people, and I would whisper what the picture was showing. That's what I did. And we went to a bunch of movies. I remember going to Dances with Wolves with her and something called The Time Bandits.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Another thing you're emphasizing is the importance of having friendships.
Absolutely. And for the autistic person, it's going to be friends who shared interests. It could be art. It could be music. It could be robotics club. It could be a lot of different things.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
So let's talk about the movie entitled Temple Grandin. How did that project come about?
Well, Emily Gerson Sains is the mother of a young autistic adult, more on the severe end of the spectrum. She's also an acting agent in New York. So she approached me and gave me an advance. And then it took her 10 years to get the project together because they couldn't get the right team of people together to do it. Then she finally found Mick Jackson, the director, Claire Danes, Christopher Munger, the writer, and they had the right team, and I think they did a really good job on the movie. But the producer was a mother of an autistic adult with severe autism, and she wanted it done right. And it shows my visual thinking, exactly how I think visually, and it shows the sensory issues in autism. You know, they did a great job with the movie. I'm very pleased with it. They showed all my projects, and all the projects were in the movie I actually built.
Yeah, well, I loved Claire Danes' role, the role that she plays as Temple Grandin. She was just brilliant.
But the cowboys killed 3 cows in it. 3 in 5 minutes because they wouldn't follow my design.
Temple, would you like to sit
I
down?
can't protect the cattle unless I design the whole system. From the moment they enter to the moment.
And she did go on to win an Academy Award and an Emmy, from what I remember.
Yeah, the movie got 7 Emmys. 5 of them were shown at the awards show, and so one of them was Best Single Camera Movie. And that was Mick Jackson.
So what did you like most about the movie?
I love the fact I had my projects in it. It showed the main character so nicely, and Claire Danes just became me. In fact, I remember listening to an interview on the radio where they were interviewing me and then playing scenes from the movie, and I'm in my car listening to this and actually mixing up me and Claire until I recognized the line in the movie.
Do you think it was more exciting for her to meet you or for you to meet her?
Well, it was. She's very serious about what she does, and I went and visited the set, but I was mainly down there to make sure the cattle stuff got done right. Had a lot of conversations about that. Don't have any Holsteins in there. You wouldn't have Holsteins on a Western ranch. Had to make sure that kind of stuff was right.
How much editorial license did the producers take with the movie?
Well, you've got a 2-hour movie, but the things that were important, the projects were correct, the main characters were shown really well. That the sensory thing and visual thinking was shown well. Yeah, there's some things that Crazy Horse, well, that was a bit of an exaggeration. But overall, I thought they did a really good job with it. And people have told me that watching that movie helped them in working with kids with autism. See, I was very concerned about clinical accuracy. Showed visual thinking correctly. It illustrated sensory issues correctly.
Yeah, well, what I really enjoyed about the movie was that, it's one thing to see a person that has quirks or is on the spectrum and sort of identify with that just from an observational standpoint.
Yeah.
And what I thought was really creative is that the producers would cut from what the scene looked like, the actual scene, to what you were seeing, right? And it juxtaposed these.
Oh, and that's where Mick Jackson really knew how to do that.
Yeah.
You see, and then Mick Jackson, visual thinker, worked with Christopher Munger, the writer, to make sure that it messed up the movie with too much of that back and forth. And that's where you get the right team, visual thinker with the writer. Because you do that kind of stuff wrong, it would have messed up the movie.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's very nice to meet you. I'm Temple Grandin.
Well, it's nice to meet you too. I'm Betty. Are you waiting to meet somebody or something?
No, I have trouble with automatic doors sometimes when I'm nervous. I'm autistic.
Oh, my son is autistic, and he's got the same thing with airplanes. Oh, come on, you just come along with me. All right, come on, and I'll make sure that they stay open. All right? You are safe now. You're safe.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Are you a horsewoman? I mean, your shirt?
Well, I like horses, but I work with cattle. I designed a dip, that cattle magazine called Brilliant.
Oh my golly, my husband read about you. He works over at Abbott.
Abbott Slaughterhouse?
Yeah, you heard of it?
Well, I want to redesign it. I went there, but they wouldn't let me meet with them. But I have several ideas about how to make a new facility that'll be much more humane and efficient.
Well, I guess you just have to meet my husband then. How wonderful that we bumped into each other.
A door opened and I went through it.
Yes, you did. And I held it.
So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering if there's any advice that you can share with parents, and specifically dads, who realize either from the time of birth or shortly thereafter that they're raising a child with differences. Maybe you can start with somebody on the spectrum and then just talk more broadly.
Well, the problem is with the first thing I tell every parent with 3-year-olds, that you cannot judge them by the severity at age 3. You got to do your early intervention and see how it comes out. That's the first thing. Then it's been sometimes dads that get the kid out doing stuff. Even some of the nonverbal kids. Moms tend to overprotect. And unfortunately, what I've seen with a very severe adult, dads tend to check out. I hate to say it, but that's what I'm seeing. But let's say you have a kid dad's a computer programmer, then he teaches his kids computer programming. But I've also seen parents that were both computer programmers so locked in the autism label, they didn't think to teach a little math genius child computer programming. And I suggested that, and they said, oh, we hadn't thought of that. But I remember reading got a new book coming out on visual thinking. It's already on Amazon. It's reading about Stevie Wonder, and he was blind, and he was out climbing trees and doing all kinds of stuff. Let's get them out doing things. We have to look at what they can do. You see, this is the problem we've got with disability. You see, I see somebody in a wheelchair and go, okay, if the top half works, they can do any job at a computer that their mind can do. I don't need the bottom half of the person at a computer. You see, that's kind of how I look at it. But then you've got very, very severe cases where, unless you have some caregivers, they can't do any normal activities with them at all. And that's very difficult.
Yeah, well, what I hear you saying is that parents, moms and dads, need to err on the side of engaging their kids and exposing them to things.
Yeah, that's right.
And, if you don't try, you'll never know.
You'll never know. That's the thing. And even somebody who's nonverbal, some of the nonverbals that look very severe can learn to type independently, even though they can't control their movements. See, this is the problem. This is where, you have such a range of things. But one thing where dads have been really helpful in talking to a lot of families is getting kids out doing things, where moms tend to overprotect. All right, let's get them out on a boat and just introduce it gradually so it's not scary. Then the kid finds out that going on a boat is fun. That's the place where, dads can do things. Okay, you're blind, let's go climb a tree. You can do that blind. See, there's a tendency to overprotect. See, that's something I can say. And look at Stephen Hawking. Just before he died, he told the New York Times, concentrate on those things. Your disability does not prevent you from doing well. That was the quote in the New York Times. And I'm adding to that, he could do math in his head really well and not much else. But boy, could he do math in his head. Okay, that's concentrating on what your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. So I think we have to look more at that. And I'd say, okay, blind, you're deaf. Yeah, there's plenty of stuff you can do.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. So I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up.
Well, it's been really good talking to you. And I always try to help families with practical suggestions. And it's not theoretical. I talk about how I learned money. I had a little allowance and I learned, could buy 5 comic books with it. But if I wanted a more expensive airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. Just simple stuff like that. Encouraging strengths. One thing about being autistic, I'm a problem solver. I'm a techie. So I want to try to help the family, make the situation better.
Excellent. So if somebody wants to learn about your work or contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I've got a website, templegrandin.com. That's autism. I have grandin.com. Templegrandin.com. You can write to us. I can be reached through the Department of Animal Science at Colorado State University. All my books are available online, and my books are shown on my websites. Do like to go out and do talks. If somebody wants to contact me about doing another interview or going to a meeting, you can give them my phone number. You have my phone number.
Yeah, well, that's very generous of you. Thank you. We'll be sure to include this information in the show notes so it'll make it as easy as possible for somebody who wants to follow up with you. Temple, thank you for the time and many insights. As a reminder, Temple is just one of the individuals who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Temple, thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me, and I guess it'll be time to leave the session, but it's great to talk to you today.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stCenturyDads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stCenturyDads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.